Okay, great. All right. Well, nice to see or not see everyone, but nice to feel everyone's presence here this afternoon. This is Ross, by the way, and we're excited to be presenting today. Um, as you can probably imagine, we're in the middle of a very busy planting week with having Earth Day yesterday and Arbor Day coming up this Friday. So what we're talking about today is very relevant because we are definitely planting a lot of trees this month and next month, and so that's the subject of our presentation today. So what we're going to do, what Alex and I decided we're going to do is I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, just reviewing some basic techniques about planting different types of trees, and then the last 20 or 25 minutes after that, Alex will speak specifically about leading volunteer planting events, which is something that we Tree Utah do all the time. So with that, I was going to get started, and so yeah, first section that we're going to discuss today in our presentation is basic planting techniques, and then how to lead some successful planting events. What I wanted to talk about today is basically the planting basics for 3 different types of trees: bare root trees, containerized trees, and balled and burlapped trees. And so just kind of go through those. I was going to say also there's one other type of tree that we plant, but I wasn't going to cover it. I decided not to cover it in this presentation, largely because it's I was going to talk about planting pole cuttings, basically. That's something that we do a lot here with Tree Utah, but we generally do it in March before the planting season that we're in right now. So it's really too late to do this type of planting, but that usually involves planting cottonwoods and willows on restoration sites, which I think would be a fascinating subject for perhaps another time. But today we're just going to stick with these 3 trees, 3 types of trees. So moving forward, just talk about planting bare root trees. This is also a type of tree that you can find often in nurseries, but we are actually probably at this point a little beyond the appropriate time to be planting bare root trees. Generally, they need to be planted, and generally they're only available to be purchased and planted before they break bud, before the weather starts to warm up in the spring. And so but perhaps if you're thinking about doing planting some bare root trees, perhaps next spring or another time, this might be useful information to have. And so what I was going to do is just kind of go through some of the challenges and the benefits of planting these different types of trees. With bare root trees, as I said, generally they're only available in early spring before they break bud. A lot of times some nurseries will not carry them, but some will. Also, sometimes these trees you can have delivered, which can be very convenient. They tend to not weigh very much, so that's another benefit to them. They're easy to transport. But once you receive them, or once they're dug up from the ground, they need to be planted as soon as possible, and basically just need to be kept moist. Generally, as soon as you do dig them up, you need to kind of keep them in water, or hopefully have a place in mind to plant them within a day or so, because they are very fragile at that state. So but yeah, again, some of the benefits, they tend to cost less than other types of trees that are available. They're lighter. They're just lighter weight. And also you have the benefit that a greater portion of their roots are intact, that compared to purchasing trees that are grown in containers or balled and burlap trees, they have more roots that have not been cut or removed or somehow manipulated by the nursery. So that also is a benefit for planting those. Yeah, so that's just one variety that you might keep in mind, one type of tree that you might think about purchasing, perhaps sometime next spring, because they can be very successful. Okay, so moving right ahead, I'm going to talk a little bit about planting container trees. This is a very common type of, often in nurseries when you go, this is probably the most common that you find in a lot of commercial nurseries. That you'll find trees and other sorts of plants in containers. And so some of the challenges about container trees that I'll talk about first is it's important to if you have the opportunity to go to a nursery, and if you're purchasing these trees by yourself, to really inspect them, to look at them closely. A lot of this will, if you have the opportunity to, or if they're not too heavy at least, to try to pull them out of the container a little bit, even at the nursery, to take a look at their roots, because it's really important to inspect them. Some of the hazards that can occur from container trees is the roots getting root bound, pot bound. Essentially, when you've had a tree that's been constricted in a container for so long, it will its roots may begin to circle and get bound up with each other, and that can be problematic later on when you remove the pot and you are planting it, because essentially the roots, the tree itself, is sort of confused as far as its reality, and when you remove the tree from the container and put it in the ground, the tree will go through a shock. And so that's definitely something that it's important to look at when you're looking at trees at a nursery. Sometimes we don't necessarily have that liberty with the work that we do here at Tree Utah. We often will work with people who have a planting project they need our assistance with, and they may just order these trees from some nursery and have them dropped off, and the first time that they see them is at the planting site. They may not necessarily have the chance to go to a nursery and inspect the roots or the container or the condition of the tree. So you really do the best you can, but ideally, if you have the opportunity, it's really good to try to pick out a tree that is not root bound. And that said, you also want to make sure that when you are buying a containered tree, that you're buying a tree that's been in the container long enough, or if it was transplanted from a smaller container or from a bare root tree, placed into a container, that it has had enough time to spread its roots and get established in the container. Sometimes we've also had problems with getting trees that are not rooted enough, not well rooted, and that can also be a problem, because then you're buying something that is not well established. So definitely some things to look at. Again, getting back to why it's important to check the roots in a container is because there's the phenomenon of circling roots, or also known as girdling roots, and that's just when you have a tree that's been in a container for a long time, its roots begin to circle, and later on that can even restrict the tree's ability to grow. You might you might have the risk of losing some limbs, or even losing the entire tree itself down the road, if you're not aware that there's a circling root problem. So definitely something to look after. If you do find a tree or a tree in a container that has circling roots, there's a number of things you can do. If you have just a pruning saw, it's definitely it's a practice that we do, is just kind of go through and make some cuts along the side and also the bottom, usually like an X formation on the bottom of the root ball after you've removed it from the container, just to kind of cut some of the roots that might be bound up, and also free roots that might otherwise be restricted. So that's definitely something that you can do. So even if you have a container tree that's root bound, it's not the end of the world. So there are ways that you can work with it. Some benefits of container trees: usually they weigh less than what the balled and burlap trees, which we're going to talk about in a second. However, you can have some very heavy container trees, and if you are buying a large size container tree, it's good to have a tree cart or some other way to move it, but generally they are less and easier. They weigh less and they're easier to move. Also, the benefits they tend to have a little less disturbance to the roots before planting, as opposed to purchasing a balled and burlap tree, where essentially you've had the almost 90% of the roots cut from when it's placed in the burlap sack from the place it's grown at the tree farm. So that can be an advantage. And again, it's available at many nurseries. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we should cover. We can always come back to this. If anyone has any questions about planting trees in containers, we can easily come back to this slide. So, okay. Let's see. Okay, now talking about planting balled and burlap trees. These are types of trees that we actually have been planting quite a bit of recently here. Tree Utah has at a number of our sites. They can be very large and heavy, and sometimes these trees will be 10 to 15 feet high, and they will definitely weigh at least 100 pounds, maybe 200 pounds. Definitely heavier than I do, than I weigh. A lot of times you'll see contractors, they will simply just maneuver these trees out of a truck, using a backhoe and a chain. They're very difficult to move. Often, if you are going to be planting these types of trees, you want to have them delivered. Unless you have a sizable vehicle that you can go to a wholesale nursery by yourself and have them loaded into your vehicle. But generally they need to be delivered because of their weight. And so moving them around can be a challenge. It's important if you have a tree cart or some kind of dolly that is made especially for hauling large trees. It's definitely recommended. Unless you don't have a tree cart, and sometimes what we might do is just have a group of volunteers help us move carefully roll a balled and burlap tree, but it's better to have a tree cart. Some other challenges about balled and burlap trees is that the trunk itself, the stem, can be very fragile because of the way it's wrapped and the fact that it is so heavy. And you really have to be careful when you're moving it that you don't snap or sort of sever the roots from the actual trunk of the tree. So really you want to make sure that when you're maneuvering it, that you're handling the root ball itself, and be very careful about the stem. Something about balled and burlap trees also that we've observed, I especially have observed, is that often we will find trees that have been planted with the wire basket and twine and the burlap itself still intact and planted just as is. And I'm not sure why we've encountered this so often, but it's very important to remove. When you purchase these trees, you have the burlap sack, but then you also have a kind of a wire iron cage and some twine wrapped around it, just to keep it to allow it to be moved. Unfortunately, I'm not sure where there might be some just misunderstanding out in some places that somehow that the tree will be okay if you plant it just as is. But I've had to dig up a lot of dead trees, dead or dying trees, where we found that the burlap and the wire cage were still wrapped around it when we dug it up. So really important to remember to remove the wire basket and twine. And so as far as the burlap itself, it really sort of depends on the condition of the tree that you have. Once you have a hole dug and you've maneuvered the root ball into the hole, if you're not able to remove the burlap without having all of the soil, the substrate that's wrapped in there with the roots, if you're not able to remove the burlap with all of that stuff, it's generally okay, as long as if it's a natural fibrous biodegradable burlap, it should be okay. You just need to make sure to pull down and remove the burlap to the base of the hole as much as possible. The important thing is just allowing space for the roots to grow out laterally and not be restricted by anything. If you are working with occasionally, you might have a tree that you've purchased that has some kind of vinyl or treated burlap. You really should remove that completely. A lot of times those types of burlap will have a treatment that or a chemical that may actually restrict root growth, and so that's something that you need to be aware of and be careful about. If you are able to remove the burlap, if for some reason the substrate and soil is really compact and tight around the bulb, then I would say remove it as much as possible if you can. So some benefits about bulb and burlap trees is just that having larger trees means they have a better chance for survival, means that they'll generally you'll have a larger tree established, and they can pick up where they left off. They may need a few years or so to get reestablished, to get their roots established into the planting site, but that's definitely one of the benefits of having that. We definitely have a higher survival rate with larger trees than we do with some of our small restoration seedlings. Also, let's see. Yeah, again, just large amounts of soil around the root ball protects them from injury. That's kind of different from again, dealing with the other types of trees that we might have, the bare root trees, for example. So, okay, so just real quick, we're going to go through some basic planting techniques, just kind of the play-by-play, step-by-step. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this in your own experience, but it's always good just to kind of go over the basics and just kind of review a few things. So generally, starting off, once you've decided, found a good place to plant the tree, you might have some sort of reason for planting. Obviously, before you've gotten to this point, you've given a lot of thought to what you're going to plant, why you're going to plant the tree there. And finding a good place, a good site to do it. You don't want to obviously do it under power lines or some place that may have plans to be developed in the future, and then that way so you want to be planting a tree in a place that you intend on having it for a long time. Let's just say that. So you start off by just digging basically a saucer-shaped hole, and it's in this process you want to make sure that as much as possible that you're not digging too deep, that you're not going beyond the depth of the tree's container or root ball. And so that means essentially measuring it. As you're digging, you understand that there's a certain depth that you don't want to go deeper than. And this is something that we continually talk to our volunteers about through the process of showing them, we might have a measuring stick or just the handle of a shovel, and saying this is how deep you want to go, but no deeper. And the reason is, of course, that we don't want to plant our trees too deeply, but we don't want to have them too shallow as well. So just having them just right at the right depth is really critical for the tree's long-term survival. The hole should be about 3 to 5 times the diameter of the container. Generally, yeah, it just really depends on what type of tree you're planting and the size that you're working with. But you want to have a wide enough hole in a saucer shape so that the roots have an area around them that they have loosened soil to spread out. And so from there you just slide the root ball out of the container, and you can do that very carefully. Basically just lean the tree down on its side, usually you may need some help. But depending on if it's a large tree, you might need some help kind of removing it from the container that way. And then just loosen and untangle any encircling roots like we talked about before. Just make sure that the roots are in a good condition. And also just checking all sides of the tree and the bottom roots as well. Okay. Next, so you've got your root ball in the empty hole, and this is where you want to make sure that all that measuring you did ahead of time has been accurate. And it's just kind of good to get on get down at the ground level and just kind of look and see, is the root collar or root flare, sometimes it's what it's called, just the area on the stem or the trunk where it starts to flare out and where the roots kind of laterally start to spread out. You want that to be right level with the ground that you're digging into. You know, if you happen to dig the hole a little too deeply, that's okay. Sometimes we just pull the tree out. We throw a little more of the fill in there, step on it, compress it down as much as possible, just so that we don't have any trees subsiding or sinking later on if we happen to dig the hole too deep. And but if you got the tree right at the right level, you then that's, and also at this point it's important to make sure that your tree is straight, that it's standing nice and vertical. It's not leaning dramatically to one side. So this is something we also do with volunteers, is just have them kind of walk around in a circle and just see, you know, from all angles, is it standing straight? And if so, then we proceed with filling the hole. And generally, also with this process, you want to fill the hole with the same dirt that you dug out of it. And so we can talk about this in a little bit, but sometimes, you know, there's practices where you may add a different type of soil, like from a nursery, or a kind of a soil amendment. I think that's okay sometimes. I think there's different philosophies about it, actually. In some ways, you want the tree to know what reality is from the get-go. That this is the soil, this is the place that you're going to be living in, and this is it. And we're not going to kind of, I guess, tease you with any sort of nutrients or nutrient-loaded substrate, or garden soil, that once they expand their roots, so they get out into the areas beyond in root area, that they're not actually going to find. So very important to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's see. Next, we want to make sure that as you're filling the tree in, that you firm the soil around the root ball, remove any air pockets. You want to it's really important. Roots will not grow well if they're exposed to air. So you want to kind of press down some of the areas that you've filled in, but you don't want to compact it. Also, adding water after you've filled it in is very important. Water will help to remove any air pockets that you might have. So yeah, water thoroughly, and then finally, before you want to make sure that you've added mulch to the root zone with about a 2 to 4 inch layer of organic material around the base of the tree. I generally like to have that about at least a meter, or 3 to 4 feet in diameter around the base of the tree. Your mulch can be anything from just a bark mulch that you might get in a nursery, or leaves. Any type of mulch will do, but basically you want organic material that's going to be there to kind of protect the tree, keep moisture in around the base of the tree, possibly protect the tree from lawnmowers or other sort of weeding equipment that you have, especially if you're in a park or a school. And so yeah, mulch is definitely very important. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving ahead because I know Alex's turn is coming up. So, okay, so just a few planting suggestions, and we'll start with the don'ts, and we'll talk about these. Like I said, generally it's not suggested to add soil amendments. Really only add soil amendments unless you're planting in really harsh conditions. Every once in a while we'll find ourselves planting in an area that's just completely compacted road base, almost like gravel or really tough clay. In that case, we do want to give the tree a fighting chance, so we will add some soil amendments. But generally, you want the tree to know what reality is down there. Also, another don't add fertilizer, especially right off the bat when you've planted the tree. It's going to be going through enough shock as it is, transplant shock, and adding fertilizer can definitely stress out a tree. So it's recommended to, if you're going to add fertilizer, just wait maybe a year or two before adding any fertilizer to a newly planted tree. Also, adding fertilizer generally is targeted at the foliage growth to add more trees, more branches and leaves. And during the first year or so of after we've planted our tree, we really want it to focus on its root growth. So that's another reason. Stake the tree. This is also, there's different schools of thought on this. I've kind of come from, I don't know, my thoughts have changed. I'm actually now more, I feel like it's better not to stake a tree unless you're in an area that has, you're dealing with a lot of heavy winds, or you're having other hazards, for example, children in a schoolyard. Generally, because staking a tree, it's almost like adding training wheels to a bicycle, and sometimes it can be okay if the tree seems very vulnerable and thin. It might be a good idea to kind of give it a little support and place to kind of get established. But you don't want to leave your training wheels on forever. You eventually want your youngin to learn how to ride as an adult. So I'm not sure if that analogy works so well, but hopefully you get the idea. That generally you want a tree to get established. You want it to learn to cope with the wind or any other obstacles without necessarily any other support. Also, just one thing to make sure of, and this is something that happens especially if you're planting in heavy clay soils, which we do find around here, is something called glazing, and that just happens essentially when you're digging a hole in heavy clay soil. Clay soil, as you know, might kind of have a really smoothed out texture, and what can happen is if you've dug a hole that's almost completely smooth, you might create an area where actually water will not really permeate the I don't know what I'm trying to say, the sides of the hole that you've dug, and so you could just have essentially water sitting in the hole, and or vice versa, you could have it so that the water cannot come from the roots have a tough time basically penetrating and accessing water through that glazed soil perimeter. So generally, just you want to have a rough surface on the hole that you dig, and not completely smooth. Okay, a few do's for planting suggestions. Like I said, add organic mulch. That it protects. Mulch is great for many things. Protects from lawnmowers, controls weeds, keeps roots moist, reduces soil compaction, and it can just look nice. So there's a lot of important reasons to use mulch. Remove tags and labels. A lot of times you buy trees from nurseries, they have lots of various tags on their branches. You want to remove those for various reasons. Also, just make sure that any tags are removed. Well, you certainly don't want the tree eventually being restricted, especially the branch growth being restricted from having tags on their branches as they grow larger and bigger. So okay, create a water-holding basin around a tree's base. Yeah, this is something also that we do quite frequently. You just generally you're kind of creating a basin on the surface. So after you've planted the tree, it's almost like creating a moat, an area where water can be kept. And so when you're irrigating the tree, or when it rains or snows, or you have some kind of precipitation, that water can easily collect around the tree's base. Okay, and then water regularly after you get started. Then you just a new tree needs to be watered fairly regularly, especially during the summer. Every 7 to 10 days is recommended. And okay, with that, I'm going to pass the headset to Alex, who's going to talk about leading successful planting events, and afterward we can answer some of your questions.
All right. Super. My name is Alex, and I'm the Education Coordinator here at Tree Utah. Today we're going to talk about leading the successful planting events. Now you've chosen your trees, you figured out what you're going to do. how do you actively engage the people who are coming out to help you at these events? I just want to be clear, during this process, I'm not actually going to be talking about the recruitment aspect of this. Our volunteer coordinator, Hannah, could speak to that much better, but this is mostly how to deal with individuals once they get to your site and the preparation leading up to that event. So the first topic is, of course, preparation. This is going to be your key to success for every event. And the key is not to under-prepare or over-prepare. You want to get into kind of that sweet spot where you have an ability to be flexible and roll with the punches if things change. If you decide that, volunteers are going to arrive at 9, at 9:01 we're going to do our intro, at 9:03 we're going to break ground, it simply isn't going to work. And you will stumble across a lot of roadblocks. When things don't go well, it kind of puts you in a place where you have a lack of flexibility to deal with changes. So just make sure that you're prepared for things to go right, and you're also prepared for things to go wrong. All right, so tree planting preparation, we like to talk about the 5 W's. If you've past 3rd grade, you probably have a pretty clear indication of what the 5 W's are, but we're going to talk about them in a tree planting event context. The first is why. Why are we planting? Now, there are a variety of different reasons why we might be holding a tree planting event. Perhaps it is Arbor Day or Earth Day. Perhaps that we are doing a pole planting or planting on a restoration site that needs trees to be in a particular time frame. Perhaps we are doing a memorial tree planting for an individual who is buying a tree to honor a deceased loved one or an anniversary. There are many, many different reasons why we could hold a tree planting event. And all of these different whys will help guide the structure of the event that you set up. The second is where. Where are we holding this tree planting event? Is it at a park that is, decent size, you can kind of see everybody? Is it at a restoration site? For example, one of the restoration sites that we plant at is about 72 acres, which presents its own challenges for trying to deal with people as they come to the site. For example, is there a restroom that's easily accessible? Is there water on the site? All of those things have to be taken into account when you're trying to make sure that your volunteers are happy and comfortable. Typically, when we do a large planting at a place like the Redwood Nature Area, we try and ensure that all the volunteers use the restroom before they get down to the site. We make sure that we bring water down to where we are, because you can suggest the volunteers bring water bottles, but at the end of the day, somebody might forget one, and it's your goal as the tree planting facilitator to make sure that nobody keels over during your event. So I'm making sure that you kind of understand the layout of your site. Also, is there easy access for volunteers to come and find you to first aid if they have an accident? And how are they going to track you down, especially on a large site? Other things to be aware of when we're considering the where is what are our soil types in that location? It's really great to do a test site visit before you go out and have an event with volunteers. If you go out there, the soil is really rocky, that may change your ratio of volunteers to trees when you're trying to figure out how many volunteers you need for the day. All right, and then what? What are you planting? Ross kind of covered all of those things, and he did talk about large trees a lot, and that will affect the tools that you're going to bring out that day. So with a large tree, you're probably going to want a tree dolly rather than try and get all of your volunteers to carry a 200-pound tree to a hole. If you're going to be planting things like seedlings, your tools may be different. So just considering what it is you're going to be planting. It's also kind of important to stage the area beforehand depending on what it is you're planting. To give you all a good example, yesterday we did a tree planting at Taylorsville Elementary. At the school we planted 8 trees with 600 students. Of course, having kindergartners dig a hole for a bald and burlap tree is something that's kind of unfeasible. So making sure that you're coordinating with your field site to maybe have the holes dug beforehand, just kind of understanding what the logistics are based on what it is that you're actually planting. And then the when. When are we planting? That is sometimes contingent on the volunteers that you are working with. We find frequently that our volunteers are most able to come out to tree plantings on Saturdays and evenings. Typically Wednesday and Thursday evenings tend to be kind of a volunteer fan favorite. But when you decide to plant may often be contingent on when you have the most volunteers available. So do try to be flexible when you are working with volunteers and planting a site. Again, it kind of goes back to that preparation setting. And also, you'll notice in the picture that's on the top right corner, there's Ross and Hannah. We're getting ready to do a pole planting. This was in the beginning of March. The weather was, it was in the low 30s. It was snowing, and then it was raining. So making sure that if you are doing a planting early in the season or late in the season, you are doing your best to accommodate the volunteers that are there with you. If we're doing a tree planting early in the morning, we do try and get things like coffee and bagels and tea and juice to make sure that our volunteers are being taken care of, they're fed, but they also feel like they're being appreciated for coming out to help us on the site. And then finally, who's helping to come volunteer? And we'll talk about that more later. But finally, and again, I want to stress this, is remember to be flexible. Things will always change when you're out on a site getting ready to plant. You know, you may have snow, you may have a perfect day, but just remember to have some flexibility kind of built into your schedule for the day on the off chance that things change. Okay, why to plant? We kind of touched on this a little bit right here, but this list is up here. It's for you to read, but I also wanted to stress that volunteers may have their own ideas on why it's important to plant trees. For example, if you're working with folks who are out to do a memorial tree planting, or if you're at a school, maybe you're trying to provide an educational experience for students, maybe it's an award for somebody who's won the Arbor Day poster contest. So there are all these reasons to plant trees, which we all tend to talk about, but for volunteers there may also be different reasons why they have decided to show up to plant trees, and that's also something really important to take into consideration. It's also great to stress information about the site that you're planting at to give volunteers and participants a feeling about what it is that they're truly contributing to, kind of the larger picture. We do find that on restoration sites, you do need to convey kind of what the larger mission is of what you're doing, why it's important. All right, so who are volunteers? Who are the folks that come out? It is everybody and everybody. We work with many, many people. Because of our Outside the Wasatch grant program, we find ourselves working with cities and townships from all over the place, all the way from Cache County down to Moab and St. George. We work with corporate groups. We work with Coca-Cola, with Goldman Sachs. We work with schools, community members, and also people who are trying to get community service hours because of perhaps a court-ordered situation. So all of these people kind of come to the table with different reasons why they're there. Sometimes it might be baggage, sometimes it might be a real desire to do something good for our community. So as I was saying, volunteers may come to the table with a variety of different reasons for being there. Maybe their corporate office has decided that today they're out to do a day of service. You may have had a city or township apply to plant trees. They're really invested in the project. You may have somebody out doing court-ordered community service. No matter what the volunteers' motives are, and no matter where they're coming from, it's kind of the role of the facilitator and site manager to make sure that everybody is on the same page, to make sure that you're accomplishing everything you need to get accomplished, which is, in our case, making sure that trees are planted correctly in the ground and giving volunteers a really, really positive experience to take home with them and the correct information. So kind of here's the play-by-play of what we tend to follow when we do an event. I'm going to cover first kind of what happens before and then day of. So before, you want to make sure that you either pick up the trees or have them delivered. It's a really great time to investigate if you're picking up a tree that's in a pot, kind of what its roots look like. VTLs, you're going to see this kind of tossed around a little bit. We work with volunteer team leaders, which are additional volunteers who have received extra training. So they're also kind of our eyes and ears on the ground, especially when we're doing plantings at our really large field sites. Staff, everybody arrives early. It's really important to kind of stage everything, especially when you're working on a large-scale planting, or even when you're working on one or two plantings, having everything out and ready to go really kind of gives the volunteers a little bit of confidence in how the event's going to go that day. It also keeps you organized and on track. If you arrive early to your site and realize that you're forgetting a few things, you may have the chance to go ahead and grab that stuff before the event begins. So again, that pre-planting is very important. When we're working on a larger site, it's nice to have everything kind of marked out. We tend to use flags on a restoration site, but we can go out and spray big circles on the ground when we're doing large tree plantings at places like parks. All right, so then everybody shows up. So the best thing to do is to have a waiver, some sort of waiver to make sure that you're not liable in case anything happens. It's also a good way to collect volunteer information to follow up with them after the event. Once all your volunteers arrive, this is your time to do your orientation and kind of set out your expectations for the day and the timeline for the day, ensuring that all participants who have arrived are on the same page and that they also know who to find if they run into any problems. It may seem a little goofy, but it does work. We wear similar matching shirts that have our logo on them. We make sure that everybody who's there knows who we are and knows how to find us. If you're working with a smaller group to get acclimated, sometimes name tags help. So you're not just saying, hey, you, stop what it is you're doing. You can be more personal and really address volunteers. Safety talk. This is probably the most important piece that we do for the day. You'd be surprised how many people would love to carry that shovel with the blade facing up and pointing in the air. We just want to make sure that, again, everybody is safe. Everybody stays on the same page. So encourage people to, yes, please use their shovel correctly. Let them know who to find if they need help. Let them know what to do if they need first aid. And your safety talk will vary from group to group. For example, again, we did a school planting yesterday where all of our tree holes were backhoed out for us. So another thing that to incorporate into that safety talk was letting teachers know where those holes were dug and making distance to stay away from those so that everybody stays safe during the duration of the event. We do like to have a planting demonstration so that everybody sees what we expect from them. And it's a good time to go ahead and have people ask questions so that every single person is on the same page. Then at this point, we divide into groups. We like to have about 5 volunteers to 1 staff or volunteer team leader. And then post-planting, one of the things to do is to make sure that you have folks kind of roving around. Myself and our volunteer coordinator, oftentimes at tree plantings, don't do a lot of tree planting. It's our job to walk around and make sure that, number 1, everyone's doing everything correctly, and number 2, that everybody's having a good time. Because that is one of the most important things. We want to make sure that people enjoy their experience, that they want to come out and plant trees again. Sometimes you do have to redirect folks. If you see somebody who, just can't get it, is just having a really bad time, have a couple of other tasks in your tool bag. Maybe they can assist with watering. Maybe they can assist with some trash pickup. But oftentimes just redirecting somebody who's having a bad day can kind of save their day and also save your day and get you a volunteer to come and return. We do also like to have folks clean up, and then we dismiss everybody at once just so you can kind of get a head count, make sure everybody's doing all right. And of course, thank everybody who shows up to volunteer. We find that, even a small appreciation, a sign of appreciation like one of our I Love Trees stickers or honoring our volunteers at some point during the year goes a long way to getting people to come back and to be really supportive of our mission and what it is that we're doing. All right, so don't hesitate, evaluate. Especially this time of year, it's really hard to get all your staff back to the office and debrief and really discuss how things went at your event. So one of the easy ways to do this is to give small surveys to your volunteers. We kind of do a mix of quantitative and qualitative stuff. So questions like, rank your experience on a scale of 1 to 5. Was it great? Was it awful? Would you recommend this again? And if you're kind of doing a generic volunteer form, it's nice to ask them, what day did you volunteer? Were you volunteering with a group? So this feedback can really go a long way into assessing what works well for your events and also what your volunteers would like to see so that you can ensure that they come back time and time again. And finally, also following up with the trees. If you have the ability to go back to your site, we're pretty fortunate in that we have a couple of sites that we're really invested in where we can do things like GPS the locations of trees that we've planted to go ahead and check on them and make sure that they're doing all right, to go ahead and visit them again in the summer to ensure their health and safety, because tree planting events with our volunteers, they're wonderful, they're fun, but they're also an investment. You're investing your money in trees. You're also investing your time, and we want to make sure that all those reasons why we plant trees, and that we're making sure we're receiving a good investment in both our time and money. And following up with the trees is a great way to ensure this. So that brings us to the end of our Lunch and Learn presentation. Thanks so much for hanging in there with us. Hopefully we kind of demonstrated how to be flexible too. And we really hope that you are able to take something away from this, and a couple of things that hopefully make your tree planting events this spring run just a little bit smoother, make your volunteers just a little bit more excited to be out there and engage the community and you. So thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you, Alex. It looks like we have some questions for Ross about planting,
Sure.
So if you could pass the mic back over to him.
All right, you got it.
Okay, this is Ross. I'm back.
So we have a couple of questions. People are really interested in planting.
Okay.
We have a question from Andrew who says that he planted a lilac tree too deeply and he removed a couple of girdling roots, but he's worried that the tree is still suffering from incorrect planting. Can you save a tree that was planted too deeply?
Huh. Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, well, obviously probably the easiest answer is it depends. And honestly, this is kind of an area I don't have a lot of experience in as far as trying to reinvigorate trees that might have been misplanted. I do know that there's a few things you can do, like, if you mentioned he was able to cut some of the girdling roots, that's definitely something that you can do as far as helping a tree that might otherwise be headed down a bad path. You might also just, if you're able to, clear some of the soil on the surface away from the base of the tree so that it has so it's not going to be as deeply planted, if that makes any sense. So that the roots have a little more, they can be a little more closer to the surface to grow outward. But yeah, it seems like a tough situation at that point. But yeah, any other questions? I'm just trying to see how much time we have left. But yeah.
We have a question from Jason. He says, what about orienting the tree to the same aspect that it was grown in? He comments that they try to get the nursery to mark the north side of the tree so that they can keep the replanted orientation the same. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think if you are lucky enough to have a good enough relationship with a nursery and understand, what their system is and have them, that makes a lot of sense, I think, if to help with kind of the shock that a newly planted tree would go through. If you are able to know what direction orientation it was planted in, I would say certainly that's definitely a good practice. But how often do we purchase trees from some place that was grown far away, and we may not have a relationship with a nursery to do that? So, but yeah, I definitely think it seems like a concept that makes sense.
Great. We have a couple questions about what to do after the tree has been put in the ground.
Okay.
As far as mulch, does the mulch go immediately right up against the side of the trunk of the tree? And also, how far should the water-holding basin, the little moat, be from the trunk of the tree?
Okay. So yeah, generally with the mulch, you want to avoid having any mulch actually touching the trunk of the tree. Certainly avoid having any of it piled up along the base of the tree. But so you want to have about 2 to 4 inches of mulch around the base of a tree, but you actually don't want it to be touching, so you want to pull that mulch away from the base of from the trunk of the tree. And as far as having a watering basin, generally I like to have a basin that's at least 3 to 4 feet wide. I mean, it really depends on the size of your tree that you're working with, but something that's at least 3 to 4 feet in diameter to offer a good enough protection and I don't know, area of mulch to provide for that tree.
So we probably don't have any time for more questions, but is there a way that our participants can reach you just in case they have other questions about planting or volunteer opportunities?
Absolutely. Happy to answer any questions, and if we don't have the answers necessarily, we're happy to help you research and find the right answer or solution. Everyone can feel free to email me at planting, that's planting, at treeutah.org if you have any questions. Also, if you wanted to email Alex, she's right here, but you can email her at education at treeutah.org.